Good morning. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Louisiana Board of Elementary and Secondary Education Superintendents Advisory Council meeting. So a few reminders. If you'd like to comment, please pick up a card from Ms. Rawson. All council members, please speak into their microphone so the audience can hear. I'd also like to give special recognition in the audience this morning is our Bessie President, Mr. Morris, Lonnie Morris, our Bessie Secretary Treasurer, Ms. Stacy Mellering, and Bessie member, Mr. Appel. Thank you for joining. As well, new members to the council from Caddo Parish, Ms. Lisa Wolfolk, and from Calhoun Parish, Dr. Jason Van Meter. Thank you for joining us this morning. With that said, we'd like to go ahead and do a roll call.
Dr. Bartholomew?
Present.
Mr. Byler?
Here.
Mr. Corley is excused. Dr. Ayler is excused. Dr. Fountain?
Here.
Dr. Gray?
He is on his way to travel.
Okay. Mr. Geis?
Here.
Mr. Javio?
Here.
Mr. Jones?
Here.
Here. Dr. Joseph is excused. Mr. Martin?
Here.
Dr. Ortling is here. Mr. Powell has a proxy. Mr. Claxton?
Here.
Ms. Still is excused. Dr. Stokes is excused. Ms. Strong is excused. Mr. Touche? Not in attendance. Dr. Van Meter?
Here.
Dr. Boyron?
Here.
Dr. Walker is excused. Dr. Williams is excused. And Ms. Wolfolk is here. I think you have a quorum. Barely.
Okay, with that said, we'll go ahead and get to the agenda. First, can I entertain a motion to approve the minutes from June 6, 2024?
Also move.
Second, Mr. Geis. Second by Dr. Bartholomew. Any discussion? All in favor of approving the minutes from June 6, 2024, signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. That motion is approved. Next agenda item, new business, consideration of revisions to bulletins regarding high dosage tutoring in response to Act 771 of the 2024 regular legislative session. I believe Dr. Bromley will present this item. Chairman, you need a motion. First mistake, may I entertain a motion to receive? Mr. Byler, second by Mr. Jones. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And welcome, Superintendent Ortling, to your first meeting of SAC. Enjoyed working with Mr. Claxton over the last year as he's led these meetings, and I know I'll enjoy that same relationship with you as well, Mr. Ortling. Just want to acknowledge relative to high dosage tutoring that we truly are trying to be one of the first states in the country to be able to scale tutoring, not just during the day with our Accelerate model, but also in the evenings with our Steve Carter voucher opportunity, so that any student or any parent that feels like they need a little additional support for the child can receive that support. Dr. Chasson is going to present this particular information, but even if we look at our most recent release of LEAP data, what we saw more globally is when we look at our ELA and our reading, we see that consistent increase. So once again, we're seeing those increases because I think our reading strategy is the right one. I think that we have the right energy there. I think we have the right policies there, so we continue to see that year-over-year growth. I think due to a lot of the work that your special education directors have done, along with general ed teachers, even with the special education playbook, and the emphasis there, we're seeing growth with our students with disabilities. So for the third consecutive year, we are seeing that growth with students with exceptionalities. Unfortunately, with science and math, we have grown, but we hit a plateau this year where we simply met the same mark as the year before. And so we maintained those gains, we didn't lose, but we also, in science and math, didn't see that growth that we would like to see. I personally believe, along with some of the other efforts that are underway, that this accelerate during the day tutoring in small group model will help us push not just the reading rates, but also these math rates moving forward and this math proficiency moving forward. I also think our refined accountability system, and particularly that emphasis on the lower achieving students and the growth altogether will help push that. But we think that the Accelerate model, with you having local autonomy within parameters, is really going to push movement in math. And so, Dr. Chasson, you want to lead this presentation today, just so that you are all abreast of all of the requirements around the act it has, and the ways in which we want to be able to support you over the course of the year. Because this is going to be the first year essentially at scale. We have played in that tutoring space for several years now, and it's been effective, but this is going to be the first year it's formalized across the entire state. So this is really important.
Thanks, Dr. Brumley. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to overview just a little bit about the legislation and also highlight some of the resources that we have available. Several weeks ago, at the end of June, we were able to launch via a webinar available to all school systems, information about Act 771, and we were able to release some initial resources, and we followed up with some, and I'd like to highlight for you all today what is still to come as far as support from us. This will impact some changes to Bulletin 1566, Pupil Progression, as well as Bulletin 741. So the basis in the first question asked by Act 771 is the student in the classroom of a highly effective teacher? And so if that teacher has been rated as highly effective for that eligible student, then the criteria has been met. If that student is not placed in the classroom of a highly effective teacher, then that triggers the need for high dosage tutoring. And the parameters for high dosage tutoring are very explicit in Act 771. And so student eligibility is listed out on this next slide, and it's basically meant for students who are below proficient. And so those are our kindergarten through third grade students who score below or well below on our literacy screener. For math, since there is no current statewide math screener in place, and that also is a result of very recent legislation, so that numeracy screener is in the development phase, but not yet available and won't be available this year. We've produced some guidance about what can be used at the school system level to determine student eligibility for math high dosage tutoring in place of a statewide numeracy screener until one is in place. And then for our 4th and 5th grade students, it's those students who scored unsatisfactory, approaching basic, and basic on LEAP in math and or ELA. When you all receive your plan in EGMS, we will be able to pre-populate this data for you all that we have at the state level. However, obviously there is some information that we won't have at the state level, and that includes your kindergarten data because they don't have assessment data yet. They're just coming to you, and so you'll have to populate that with their beginning of the year data as you complete that literacy screener. And we, of course, will not have the numeracy data for those lowest grade levels because that will be determined at the LEA level based on the guidance we've provided around how to determine eligibility for those students in math. The requirements, as I stated before, are very explicit about about what should occur and how the tutoring should take place. It should begin no later than 30 days after the student is identified as eligible. It should include direct instruction, some formative assessments to progress monitor, and it should align with the Tier 1 instruction, so that core instruction that's happening in the classroom every day and grade level content. It should persist over a period of at least 10 weeks and take place 3 times a week. There's also the word approximately 30 minutes And this is really meant for some of our youngest students. When we think about a kindergarten student, it may not always be developmentally appropriate to have that student in a tutoring session for a full 30 minutes, and 20 to 25 minutes may work better for that kindergarten student. So you see that word approximately 30, and that's really based on the student and meant for some of our youngest learners, and then for maybe some of our students with exceptionalities who 30 minutes might not be appropriate for them to be in a tutoring setting. I also want to note here that the tutoring is for a minimum of 10 weeks. And so an important conversation I've had with a few school system leaders over the last few weeks is once that minimum requirement is met, it really can then be determined at the system level to go above and beyond those 10 weeks. And this might be something that you want to have a targeted approach about. And so you all may say, well, we have done the minimum requirement for all of the eligible students and met those 10 weeks that are required, but maybe for our third grade students, who we are identifying as maybe being at risk for our third grade promotion policy, we want to go above and beyond and do maybe 20 full weeks of tutoring. So you can have some differentiation here once you meet that 10-week minimum. And I would really encourage you all to do so and go beyond that 10-week requirement for certain targeted groups of students where it makes the most sense based on your data.
Dr. Chasson, I want to add too, I want to continue to call out on the third grade retention policy. With all effort that you can expend here, don't let this be a surprise to a parent at the end of the year. So let's make sure we're doing good communication over the course of the year about progress. And I think you have the tool available via the template after each of those beginning of year and middle of the year screeners so that the parent understands where their child is. And I would probably even include information, if you're not doing so already, just the ramification of if the child isn't where they need to be by the end of the year, what that means. Just to try and avoid surprises within your community, I just want to encourage as much as possible to communicate out.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dr. Browning. I think that's really important, especially as we head into a new school year. The next requirement, I think, is one of the most important to note. I think this is one of the most challenging parameters that have to be met by this legislation is that groups of no more than 4 students. And I'll mention here that these tutoring requirements that are very explicit are evidence-based. These are all research-based best practices around tutoring where, impact data has shown student achievement growing when these parameters are in place. So these aren't just, random requirements that were placed into this bill, but they are incredibly research-based, including this group size of no more than 4 students, where it's really been shown by research when the group size expands, the less effective the tutoring becomes and the less impact you have on student learning. And so I think this is one of the most challenging parameters for school systems to meet, and I think it's why you'll have to think of options. So this is all school day embedded, and I know a lot of you have already within your time that you might call accelerate. You may call it remediation, WIN, which stands for what I need. So there's time already carved out. I like to call it extra time to learn, and that kind of encompasses everything outside of core. I would encourage you as you look at your school schedules, utilize the time that you already have in place. But many of you, I would assume, already have some extra time to learn in place, but maybe what you don't have is that group size and that frequency, which is where you'll need to invest some funding to ensure that you get to that group size and that frequency to meet the requirements. What I would encourage you not to do is to carve more time out of your day. So if you already have something you're calling what I need, intervention, I would not then carve additional time for tutoring on top of that because you will be stealing from your core instruction time. And in essence, really making student learning loss worse because you won't be devoting enough time to core instruction. So I just wanted to note that. We've been trying to make that really clear in our guidance and in our conversations, but it really could become dangerous to take additional time out of core instruction for extra time to learn. We have to make sure that that core instruction time is really held sacred so that teachers can cover all of their grade level core content and they have enough time to do so. So really be thoughtful about that scheduling. Another requirement is that it must be led by a consistent tutor or a small group of tutors, and this I think just makes a lot of sense. If you have a revolving door of adults, of individuals working with students, that can become really difficult for learning. It has to be embedded within the school day.
Yeah, before moving on to, like, keep in mind that these elements only come into play for those students, and correct me if this isn't accurate, Jenna, but it only comes into play for those students who aren't already assigned to a teacher labeled as highly effective. So as you're thinking about staffing for this, those students that are enrolled in a teacher's classroom with a label of highly effective, this doesn't come into play for them because the assumption is made that they are receiving instruction via a highly effective teacher. So this only comes into play for those students that aren't in that classroom with that highly effective teacher. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't, use these options for students in that highly effective teacher's class as well. But as you're thinking about staffing, that is something that you can think about and how you want to address that, because you do have all of those students, so to speak, off the table if they're already engaged in a highly effective teacher's classroom.
The next requirement is that it can be provided in person or virtually. And I would not rule out a virtual option. One option that you have with your funding, which is in just a few slides, is the choice of using a tutoring provider, which some of them are in person and many of them are virtual and offer virtual tutoring. I would not rule that out for a really good option to provide services to your students. As you look across your schools, you will have some schools that are really easy to meet these requirements with the staff you have, maybe with the schedule you have, because you have less eligible students at that school and a lot of highly effective teachers. You are going to, however, have some schools where it becomes very difficult to provide these services. And it will become very difficult to provide it without the help of a tutoring provider. So I would absolutely entertain that for those schools who need it the most. The last requirement is to use materials that are on our approved curriculum list, including materials created or provided by the department. Now, one of the resources that was released a few weeks ago was a workbook that encompasses the plan that you all are required to submit within Act 771 by September 15th. The plan is actually going to live in EGMS, our e-grant management system. But for now, you all have the workbook to complete your planning in, and that EGMS application will open by August 15th. And so you all will then have that month to have that submitted, and we will turn those around as quickly as possible in an approval process. We do, however, plan on holding a very high bar for expectations in those plans, and we plan on giving feedback on the plans as needed. And then once those plans are ultimately approved, then the funding will be released via a direct payment. And funds must be used, for the following expenses. It must be used to pay the salary and benefits for full or part-time LEA staff. And then it could also be used for an external tutoring provider that is listed in our new vendor guide for the Accelerate High Dosage Tutoring. We are constantly updating that tutoring guide. And I would also just make you all aware, if there is a tutoring provider who is not on the guide, who you would like to use, send them to us. We are happy to work with them, make sure they fulfill the requirements, and have them listed on the guide so that you can use them and pay them with this funding. And so the idea here, the intent for this funding, is that it is ultimately being used to pay the tutors of those individuals providing services, whether those are LEA staff or whether it is a tutors employed by an external provider. And finally, these are the resources that we currently have available. We have a guidance document as well as an FAQ document that we've been adding to every few weeks, and we'll continue to add the questions that we're receiving from school systems to that FAQ document. We have the initial vendor guide available that we will continue adding to weekly. We are processing those very quickly through a request for applications process and adding to that vendor guide. And then the workbook for you all to begin your initial planning prior to the EGMS application opening. One thing to look forward to that we will be releasing next week are templates for a new student plan. So we have multiple pieces of legislation and policy around a student plan at this point. There's a literacy reading student plan. There's a numeracy student plan. There's now a tutoring student plan. And we also had the older IAIP plan that was in bulletin. And so what we've done is we have made one template that includes the requirements, the parameters. We've tried to make it very simple, parent-friendly, teacher-friendly, but it will be one template that satisfies the requirement of all of this legislation and policy. And that template will be released next week, along with guidance on how to complete it and samples that you all can use to inform your student plans that I think you'll find really helpful and useful. We're finalizing that draft right now, and so we've been trying to chat with folks in our school systems for feedback on these plans to make sure they're just simple and clear and easy for people to use while still meeting the requirements. And so if you all have anyone in your school system who you would like us to send it to, you can let me know. Afterwards, I'm happy to send it out to anyone who wants to look at that plan and give us some feedback. And that concludes my presentation.
Sure, any questions, Mr. Claxton?
I was just going through the bulletin 566. Is it a typo or the beginning year 26, 27? Is that something I'm just reading, or is it just, I mean, we're incorporating now, should it say 24, 25?
Oh, that, I think what you're looking at right there, Superintendent Claxton, is for the numeracy screener.
Okay, I was just trying to read and was talking and it stated on 566, I thought we were putting it in place now.
No, the numeracy screener is in development, which is why we've released some guidance on what you all can use at the district level to determine student eligibility for the tutoring. The numeracy screener, that legislation just passed during this session, and so it's currently under development.
I just didn't know if it was supposed to be faster or not. Thank
I
you.
wish it could be.
Any other comments or questions? No public comment? We have a motion, entertain a motion to endorse.
Mr. Orley, before that vote, I just want to share that please let us know if you need support on this. Like we are more than willing to jump on a Zoom with you and your team, more than willing to drive out to your system. Like we want to do everything we can to make this be as effective as it possibly can. And so if we don't know that you're struggling in some particular way or have questions, you know, we're not going to be able to help or provide the feedback. We just know we want to be able to. And so if you need support before the beginning of the school year as you're thinking through this, or during the school year as you get involved, like let us know because we want to make this right across the entire state.
Kevin, we have another question before making a motion.
So I did receive a communication from a prospective vendor about offering the high dosage tutoring for my school system. Could you all support us in kind of like vetting some of those vendors who might reach out and say, we're interested in partnering with you? Would it be someone that the department would recommend? Could you assist school districts in that kind of way?
So a requirement in the legislation is that in order to use the funding, you can partner with anyone you want out of other funding sources, but for this funding, you do have to use a provider that's on our tutoring vendor guide. That's linked here. So we have done that vetting. Now we're happy to talk with you all about your planning with that provider as well, if that would be helpful. We've been able to do that. A lot of these providers, though, they have extensive experience in helping you schedule, helping you group students. And so that's something I know that they can be helpful with as well. But I'm happy to talk more, but they do have to be on our tutoring vendor guide. And that is a pretty extensive vetting process that we already do for them to get on that vendor guide.
So, I read the communication, they talked a lot about their service, and in particular, reference themselves being on approved list by the Department of Education. It kind of was like, okay, is that a red flag? I want to partner with someone who might not be on the vendor.
But you could also send them to us, and we're happy to vet them to see if they would qualify to be on the guide. We're, like Dr. Chesson said, we're consistently looking for new vendors to be on the guide.
I'll just say they run from my neck of the woods.
Any other comment? Entertain a motion to endorse.
Motion to report favorably.
First by Mr. Gonzalez, second by Ms. Woolfolk. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Motion passes. Okay, we move to the next agenda item, which is agenda item 3.2, consideration of revisions to bulletins in response to 2024 regular legislative session. Dr. Bromley, start. Oh, I did it again. May I entertain a motion to receive?
So moved.
Second, Dr. Bourne, second by Dr. Gray. Thank you.
So as you all are aware, there were a lot of moving parts this legislative session, and many of the bills made their way through to acts, and Ashley Townsend on our team has done a really good job of running the traps on a lot of these acts to try and determine the best way to put these things into policy. And so you have a host of policy. Ken and I were even talking earlier about, wishing that some of this would have been to you even earlier. But as you can see, this is a significant amount of acts of the legislature that actually had to turn into policy. So she's going to walk through some of these changes that will go in the bulletin so that you're informed, because all of these are the ones in particular that are going to Bessie this August.
Thanks, Dr. Roman. So this is a lot, and if you want to connect anyone on your team with me to look in more detail at any of these, please do that. We are very interested in feedback. As you said, it's taken some time to digest all of it and to synthesize it into bulletin language. So we are still accepting feedback and working through details. So again, please connect me with anyone you would like. There also is this curated list of active NUPER system leaders. We released in the system leaders newsletter on Tuesday. But if you didn't get a copy of that, let me know. I have a few extras. This, again, is not an exhaustive list. We tracked something around 200 legislative instruments this session, but we really tried to pull out the ones that we wanted to make sure to draw your attention to, either because it's going to result in a Bessie policy item, or because it's something that there's an implementation action on your part, or it's just something we wanted to make sure that you and your teams look through with your own legal counsel and your own teams to see how that will impact you locally. So I wanted to draw your attention to that. So we've grouped these in topics, and you'll see, even as you look through the very large packet of bulletin language that you received today, you'll notice a few sections, a few bulletins maybe in there a couple of times, and the reason for that is that as we've worked through these, we've grouped them into a few different topics. For example, school administration, or school safety, or academics. So you'll see a couple of them on here twice, but it's because they may impact more than one different area in the way that we group them. So first, just wanted to again highlight numeracy. Dr. Chesson mentioned this briefly. This will go into implementation no later than the 26-27 school year. The numeracy plans, as she said, will be consolidated into that one individual academic support plan. We're very excited about being able to consolidate that instead of having to repeat the individual student planning process as is starting to happen with all the different planning that we've been implementing. And then the intervention for students. And I know a lot of you are doing this already, so this is a good opportunity to use those intervention practices that you already have in place and begin thinking about how this will be implemented a couple years from now. For Act 193 with the superintendent evaluation, on this, the contract is not really our arena. So what we really attempted to do in this is just provide some definitions about how that growth and student achievement would be defined across the state.
And we don't want that to be in our ordinance.
Correct. So when you look at that, it's very focused on just what does this mean? And then that will be implemented in your systems the way you do that. And then Dr. Romeo, we wanted to talk about the Act 368, assignment of chief operating officer.
Oh, yeah, look, so one of the items in the governor's education package was the assignment of a chief operating officer to a school system if they fail on consecutive years to meet the 70% requirement of funding going into the classroom. And so that, basically the way in which that legislation reads, it says if a school system fails on consecutive years to meet the 70% mark of revenue going into instruction, then the state superintendent may appoint a chief operating officer to the school system who would then go in and work with the superintendent and the business manager to identify the challenges and to build a plan of correction that would have to be submitted and presented. And so that's the way in which that reads, and we've simply put it in that policy. Of note, it says state superintendent may, it doesn't say state superintendent shall.
So this next section, there are a number,
Ms. Towns, I'm sorry, just a quick question in relation to Bulletin 130. Section A, C, each LEA must conduct an annual needs assessment to determine the effectiveness of its professional learning requirements and programs. And there's no specificity there. So that's left to determination of the system, how to apply that.
yes, sir, and that is in response to one of the recommendations from the Let Teachers Teach Task Force, and Dr. Romley will talk about that a little bit later on. This is one of their recommendations, was just to take a look at the professional development and the training requirements that we're asking of teachers, and just say, is this still a good use of everyone's time? Is this, being done in an efficient way to conduct that needs assessment? So, and he'll talk more about those Let Teachers Teach recommendations in a little bit. All right, so a number of revisions to Bulletin 741. You'll see a few of these sections in your packet more than once, as they did overlap multiple different topics, as I'm sure you can imagine. So some of these that you'll see in there, some of them are very small updates as far as the amount of text, but it could impact some actions that you have in place, for example, on vaccinations that might impact some of the information that you're sending home at the start of school about immunization requirements. So some of those will impact the parent communications that you're sending home. Some of them, for example, Act 216 with the mandatory reporters. For that one, you really want to look at your local policy and make sure that your local policy isn't standing in the way of a mandatory reporter being able to appropriately report that up to DCFS and law enforcement.
Let me speak to that one too. This is the issue where, because I know many of you use the same counsel, and then use some of the other another supplemental organization to help build some of your policies. There's policies in some systems that indicate that if an employee suspects abuse from another school employee, that in the policy, many systems have created a process for that reporting. And so that process came into question about was that a hindrance to an employee reporting abuse to law enforcement. And so we've included in the newsletter both an AG opinion now that says that you need to make sure that the employees feel comfortable and are compelled to report straight to law enforcement, but also Representative Kim Carver out off the North Shore filed legislation and has passed into act basically that provides additional clarity to this. So obviously we all know that all educators are mandatory reporters. You have to report abuse. The question of concern became, we knew if the abuse was suspected from the home or someone outside of the school, you would report to DCFS. But when it was suspected abuse potentially from someone from inside the system, in many systems there was a process of reporting up before you got to law enforcement. this basically says now that person is required to report to law enforcement.
On the acts related to tobacco and marijuana products, a couple of, and there's one on a different side too, but the consequences for those have changed somewhat, so that's a good one to review with your legal counsel, with your disciplinary policy, that will impact there. The home study students, again, is just allowing them to travel for activities. And so, again, some of these other ones that you're probably familiar with already, they'll be incorporated into the bulletin in the appropriate places. Anything on that one, everyone? So we look at bulletin 135, health and safety. Again, some updates here related to vaccinations, and then emergency medications as well. Some information required to be presented to student athletes, the coach training requirement, which will go into place when funding is available for that. And then you'll notice a couple of new sections, a new chapter, in fact, about behavioral health services. This wasn't previously in BESI policy anywhere, but the Act this year has a requirement that we promulgate rules around this. So we've got the policy there. It includes things that should be included in your local policy, which it also requires you to develop a local policy on that. And then it includes the complaint process that will now be in place that will run through LDOE. Since that's not limited to special education students or students with disabilities, we've included it in that bulletin 135, health and safety, since it's applicable to all students. So that's the reason for that placement there. All right, and then a few others in bulletin 741. You'll notice several of these start to get into some of our Let Teachers Teach recommendations, and so Dr. Roman, I'll let you address these.
Yeah, actually, we'll work together on this one. I'll take the first one, which is required instruction and trainings. So this is really a culmination of Representative Chuck Owen and Representative Troy Romero's work alongside the Let Teachers Teach Task Force to take some of their trainings that were required in statute and kick them over to the department, making recommendations to BESI on which trainings are appropriate for teachers and how often those trainings should take place. And so it removed them from statute and sent that authority to make these decisions over to BESI. Now, whenever I have conversations with teachers, and I'm sure for you too, one of the common things you hear from teachers are just, that they feel like there are these onerous and repeated trainings over and over and over again where they appreciate the fact that it's important content. They need to know it, but they feel like after they know it, they don't need to go and have to do the training every year. So really two of the recommendations out of our Let Teachers Teach work group, one was allow for an exemption from trainings. We're not really addressing that issue, but it also has to do with a cycle of the trainings. And so I haven't mentioned this publicly up until this point, but what we are going to be recommending to the board is for the trainings that were kicked over to us in statute, we're going to recommend a one and done policy. So after the teacher successfully navigates and completes their training course, they would receive a certificate for that. It would include the training, it would include the training date, and they would maintain that training completion throughout their career. And so basically, when we look at topics like communicable diseases, universal precautions, first aid, adverse childhood experiences, mental health, bullying, suicide prevention, all of these trainings, we're going to move on to what we're essentially calling one and done. So the teacher takes the training, they receive the certificate, they keep that in their file, and that is carried with them throughout their professional career. Now, within your local system, if you feel the need that you want to add in additional trainings for bullying or suicide prevention or communicable diseases, you feel like that's important, you realize that you need to address that, you can always do that. But in terms of us at the state level, that's what I am going to be recommending to our board to move forward. And if they have that certificate that includes the date of the training, the name of the training, the type of the training, Then if we have a teacher that moves from Caddo Parish to St. Tammany Parish, they can simply carry their certificate with them, and that would exclude them from having to repeat that training. And so that's what we're looking to do with that, and I hope that our board gives that consideration, because I think that would be welcome from our teachers. And again, all of these things are important. They're important. It's just, do our teachers need to do these trainings every single year? And I would offer to you that I think the answer to that is no. So that's 686 and 716. You want to take 400?
Matt,
Yeah, I think there may be a couple of questions.
so as we've started the school year, we're already doing those trainings again because we have no information back then. So just an idea, if you recommend that to Bessie, can we say that if they've done it for the 24-25 school year, that would count? So they'll have to do it again next year?
Yeah.
If that's possible.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Dr. Berman, I also have just a question, or perhaps a suggestion. Is there going to be a central place where the certification is going to be held as potentially, if approved by Bessie, would that be held?
We do not intend to move these trainings into our certification department, but we will support by providing some templates that could be used that are uniform templates for the certificates.
We're working on a guidance document as well too that we're hoping to release right after August Bessie. That'll say, here's what the requirement was, here's what it is, here's some resources you can use, and put all the trainings for the students and teachers in one several-page document. That way you can go through and see all the changes. For Act 400, Student Discipline and Teacher Bill of Rights, one of the big changes for this addressed something that is mostly already in policy, but the difference is this is moved from a may to a shall in terms of removing students from the classroom who are causing an interruption in instruction. And so this will require some guidance for your school level leaders about what that means and what that looks like. And I encourage you also to talk with your special education staff about appropriate actions for those students as well. Of course, if the principal walks into the room and the student stops disrupting instruction, then instruction is no longer being disrupted, right? But if that student is causing the rest of the students in the class not to be able to receive instruction, then some actions will need to be taken as a result of that. And then another piece that's gone from a may to a shall is after that third removal, a conference with the parent needs to happen before the student returns back to that classroom. The rest of the policy around that has been in place already. It's just that it's moved from permissive to required.
And we had a good conversation, Trey was with me and several superintendents. We had a good conversation about some of these discipline, and you were there, these discipline bills. What I'm going to encourage you to do both today and also you'll hear more from me later on this issue is be assertive on these student behavior issues. Let's make sure with all effort we have that we are creating environments where teachers can teach and other students can learn. And I believe that the overwhelming majority of students in school systems across Louisiana are meeting those expectations every day. But I don't want us to be a state where a handful of students are disrupting that learning environment for teachers and kids. And I believe there has been a move to more of a softer approach of not being assertive in dealing with these complicated matters. And I think that we have to be more on the affirmative in making sure that these are environments where teachers can teach and kids can learn. And so just for what it's worth, take that encouragement and if you even need to within your local communities, if you need to say, oh, even the State's department's talking about this, feel free to do that. But I just think we have to show some strength here in making sure that these learning environments are conducive to learning.
And Act 337 related to student expulsion is also related here. It will move from recommendation for expulsion at the 4th suspension down to the 3rd suspension, and that's for suspensions that are not related to dress code or tardiness. Then Act 324 is related to suspensions as well. After that second suspension, you'll need to have a process in place in your district where someone at that school level looks at that child and says, do we think that this behavior is due to a larger issue at play here? And then can we make a referral to additional services that may be helpful to that student? So before you get to that third suspension, must recommend for expulsion, at the second suspension, there's that measure that will let you see if that student needs some additional support. Then at grade 13, the electronic telecommunication devices, I know there's been a lot of discussion about this and how certain things will be defined. So if you have questions or ideas or comments about that draft, you can see what we have in place there so far. Any other comments? Alright, and then the last set that I wanted to bring up for you all, we had a number of pieces of legislation related to special education, and our special education advisory panel will look at all of these in some depth next week and give us feedback on them. But we also wanted to make sure that you had a copy of them, that you can have your teams look over those. So we had that Act 198 was touched several different areas. And so that's one that you look at the beginning of it and you think, oh, this is pretty brief, but it's actually several different topics related to special education in that one act. So that's worth looking through. And then some related to IEP scheduling, the way communications with parents carry out, that early resolution process, those agreements being enforceable, and then some training for your board members, and then some requirements regarding your local special education advisory councils as well. So a number of special education revisions there, touching several different bulletins. The bulletin list actually runs on the next page. So I'm happy to take any questions. I know that was a lot. I don't expect you to have read all of those words by today. So if you have questions over the next few days, or again, if you want to connect me with someone on your team, happy to talk through any of these in more detail.
I just have a quick question. Pupil progression plan. We just recently received pupil progression plan. So, excuse me, all those changes in the current pupil progression plan that we're proposing here today?
Yes, sir. And we have received some questions from districts who are saying, well, 1566 says this, but this template says that. We made that template in anticipation of the bulletin revisions. And some of that plan consolidation is reflected in that too, which has been done in statute. But again, there's that process of transferring it over into policy.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
In reference to Act 216, I think two terms have been used, reporting to law enforcement and reporting to the Department of Children and Family Services. So in Richland Parish, we'll have school resource officers for the first time. I just want to make sure my interpretation is correct. As I appreciate it, school resource officers are mandatory reporters. But an employee at a school, let's just say a teacher, if they suspect child abuse, they can't report it to the school resource officer and say, I met the requirement. They would have to report directly to DCFS. Am I correct with that interpretation?
Yes, sir. And the act does have some pretty specific language about that. So that's a great piece to review.
We want to encourage you to, Mr. Jones, to have conversations with legal counsel about that.
Any other feedback or questions from the council? Okay, we do have a public comment card from Ms. Erin Sims, Communities and Schools, Gulf South.
Hi, thank you. I'm Erin Sims. I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I work for Communities and Schools Gulf South and from New Orleans. And I'm the director of advocacy, and CIS is what we call it for short. We are a nonprofit that serves about 19,000 students in Louisiana across 5 parishes, providing wraparound and mental health support. And I'm here to talk today to talk a little bit about the teacher training requirements as they relate to suicide prevention training. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among teens, and when students are struggling emotionally, we know that has a profound impact on their well-being, their academics, everything about their life. Teachers are in the natural support system of students, but they're not mental health professionals, and that's exactly what they said in teachers, that teachers teach, which, I think has informed a lot of why I wanted to come and talk today. But rather than shouldering the primary responsibility of students' mental health, I think we really see teachers as being that link, that bridge to the correct support that is necessary and vital in those situations. And I think I see the suicide prevention training as a tool that just helps teachers know what to do. It helps them to know who to go to in the school. And I believe as a mental health provider that's worked in schools in Louisiana, a mom that has a kid in a public school, I think that students and teachers would benefit greatly from having some type of exposure annually to suicide prevention training. But I do understand that might not be feasible. Some people have been educators for a long time, so people don't feel uncomfortable, or some people do feel uncomfortable with this, and we wouldn't want them to be placed in a situation where they're forced to talk to students in a really situation where they need the right links to support. So while it might not be feasible, if it is still an opportunity for teachers to have the ability to take the training, at the schools to be able to identify teachers who might want to receive this training in further education and then allow them the opportunity to do so, whether that be during the school day or have the funding to do the training. And then, allowing for schools to have better, clearer protocols. I know that y'all report crisis plans back to the state, including suicide prevention in those crisis protocols, so that everyone in school knows what to do. And then also that would maybe allow for schools to identify the people in school who want to help out in these situations, the people who have the training, and then let students and teachers, know who those people are and who to go to. Another great preventative measure that I think schools in Louisiana could definitely improve upon is peer support. Kids know what's going on with each other well before the adults do. So if kids in schools have programs where they've been trained to identify students who are at risk, their peers who are at risk, the peers who are telling them things, and then they know the adults to go to, that's incredibly valuable. It's incredibly preventative and less reactive. And again, it takes weight off of the teachers, and everyone in the system is kind of shouldering their appropriate weight, their appropriate response. And lastly, just implementing surveys. The previous piece of legislation had a survey mechanism, and we know that 80% of schools in Louisiana were doing suicide prevention training, in the past, prior to this year. And so incentivizing that, giving a gold star, a blue ribbon, a banner, who's doing this well, highlighting and elevating schools who are opting in, who are choosing to do this work, I think would be really valuable. Thank y'all. Is that my time?
Thank you, Ms. Sims. Okay, we also have a public comment from Mr. Ronnie Morris, Bessie Board President.
Thank you. I was just looking forward to the next school year, and I'm looking for the opportunity to get back in the classroom and work as a substitute teacher. And so in that role, I'm just really curious about the cell phone policy change, implementation, and really interested in getting some feedback from superintendents on what their recommendations are going to be for classrooms with regard to the cell phones and the earbuds. So anything you guys can share there, I'd really be interested to hear about.
Up to the council, I know just from discussing with many superintendents, it's going to be very difficult to manage, but certainly I think the language that Ms. Townsend has provided in the bulletin gives some leeway or flexibility relative to what the instructional day encompasses, but I know we're going to do our best job to try to uphold the policy as written. So it's going to be difficult though, because every student, obviously, and every adult carries a cell phone. Some adults truly feel as though that's their only connection to their child. So I think, Ms. Morse, to your point, I think it's going to be a very difficult task for systems. Dr. Orling, I would encourage everyone to go and read, because a lot of the laws that are passing around the country about cell phone prohibition are based on the work of John Haidt, H-A-I-D-T. And so if you haven't read that, and if you're on the fence about how assertive you feel like you need to be on the cell phone policy, go and read John Haidt, just to make sure that you're informed on the origin of some of these policies. And that may inform you one way or the other. But I would encourage you to know that that is the origin for many of the states that have passed these cell phone prohibitions.
So I was going to say, I was going to mention this book. It's called The Anxious Generation. And you can do a search for him, and there's some easy interviews and podcasts. I think our approach has to be from that standpoint. If our approach is simply, we're banning cell phones, you can't use them in school, which is sort of what's coming, but we have to start a conversation. If you listen to him and read that book, it will, if you have kids, you're gonna give them a flip phone maybe in the 9th grade. I mean, it's very compelling, it's research-based, and, we all need to read it, and our communities need to be talking about this. We're trying, and you know, we're the most conservative community probably in the state, next to Mr. Jabby over there. But, and our people do not like being told anything, but we are trying to start a conversation around what it's doing to our kids. And I think that's the approach we need to come. I think in the next year or two, we will see a massive shift in the state. Not in the state, in the country. I mean, from all this work with Jonathan Haidt. But you should look up that awesome podcast, listen to a couple of those, and it's going to make you think a lot about this.
Dr. Fountain, you say that about Mr. Jabby, while you've got Mr. Martin. Look, you have the cover of the law too, so remember that as you're engaging in conversations with your families, you have the cover of the law.
Yeah, I think the challenge just becomes, as we all know, is the personnel to address those challenges and pulling instructional personnel to address that in such a wide range of issues that could become. But I think all superintendents and systems will certainly implement it the best that they can. Any other feedback from superintendents? Okay, can I get a motion to endorse item 3.2, consideration of revisions to bulletins in response to 2024 study session? Dr. Gray, second by Mrs. Jalvia. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion is endorsed. And that concludes the agenda. We are adjourned.
That's because you put accountability and all that.